This episode is brought to you by Loot Crate.
They look like those little blob fish.
They kind of feel like that.
They do. You guys have been playing a lot of Japanese games, right?
Snacks. Sorta.
Here and there.
Here and there. I don't really consider myself a... You having trouble with emoji?
Keep talking.
All right. I don't really consider myself much of a JRPG person.
I guess I'm a little bit more of one. I've been playing them since I was a kid. So I started out with Final Fantasy and kind of grew from there. So I think JRPGs are kind of strange because I think you have to start playing them as a kid to really enjoy them as an adult.
And you wrote a JRPG review for Polygon recently, right?
I did.
Not a great game.
Not a great game, not a great game. So I played Conception 2, which is like a dungeon crawling dating sim. So imagine like a bastard cousin of like the Persona series, and you have Conception 2.
Dungeon crawling dating sim.
Which sounds really awesome in theory, right?
It sounds like two things that I would never expect to go together.
And then there's a third element. A pregnancy or something?
It's fake pregnancy.
Okay.
So basically, before you go into dungeons, you have these heroines that you classmate with, which really they're just holding hands, and there's like some sexy time cutscenes.
Sure.
And then you produce star babies that you take into battle with you. Yeah, Japan.
I don't understand JRPGs, and I'm starting to think I don't understand video games anymore, because all of this sounds extremely alien to me.
I just think JRPGs, when you're describing them, make you say sentences that would make no sense in any
Exactly. It's like you take all these elements that don't really make sense on paper, but somehow it's a game already.
Yeah. Well, it's weird. Like, I think we have an interesting sliding scale here of you seem to be pretty well versed in JRPGs. I have mixed feelings about them in concept, and then you're just kind of not down.
Yeah, I mean, the story is never the thing that I care most about in games. And I feel like you have to really be into a story to be into a JRPG, because otherwise you're just going to be grinding the whole time. But do you like the grinding?
I do. There's something about leveling that, and this is probably like a horrible thing, but I'm just like, ooh, leveling makes me feel so good. I'm accomplishing so much.
I like that too. I don't mind the grinding.
It's funny, because for me it's the inverse, where the only thing I care about, like Persona, I'm playing Persona 3 right now on a PSP Go, which is hilarious.
Oh, little beady thing.
Yeah, it's got glitter in the paint. Anyways, Persona 3 is really cool, but I wish there was a way to just do the conversations, because it's not the grinding or the combat that I like about that game, it's the really good writing. It's like the dating sim visual novel stuff. I wish the Persona games had an option of just the visual novel and none of the dungeon crawling combat, because that stuff bores me to tears, kind of. Like, that's not what I come to that game for, I guess.
Right. Well, Persona I think is rare because it does have really good writing and surprisingly good characters. So you do want to spend time with them, you do want to talk to them. I think a lot of JRPGs aren't quite like that.
Okay.
Like they do have somewhat weak stories that are pretty much riddled with a lot of cliches and the same tropes you see over and over,
Yeah, it just, the dialogue in a lot of them is so cringeworthy, and I almost appreciate it in like an ironic sense, and I'm like, oh, this is so Japan.
Yeah,
that's kind of a good point though. I realize everything I've said so far makes it sound like I really hate them, but actually I kind of do love them because they're so campy and weird.
Yeah, it's like a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing else feels like that. I think there's something about a good bad JRPG. Like when you get a JRPG that it just owns its cliches and is super cartoonish and silly, there's something that's like, oh man, you were just grabbing your dumbness by the horns and not letting go.
I think Ni no Kuni is the JRPG that has appealed to me the most. But see, I still haven't even played it that much, so I can't say for sure if I would even like the full game, but like, that's a JRPG that seems to like really know what it is and have like a clear direction for itself. And like the art, another thing I don't typically like about JRPGs and just like anime in general is the art style. I feel like Ni no Kuni makes up for that with its art style, but I still like, there's just something about it that just doesn't appeal to me very much. I'm extremely impatient also, you know this about me, so I feel like you have to have a lot of patience for JRPGs.
Like Persona 3 I'm playing on beginner right now, which is embarrassing to say out loud, but it's because I just want to run through the dungeons and get to the next conversation with these characters who I genuinely find appealing. You're doing Persona 4 right now, right?
I am, I'm working my way through it. Those games are pretty long, like you're probably looking at like a 60 to 70 hour thing depending on how much you level grind, if not more.
And then Persona 3 is super padded, like it's almost 100 hours of just like the late game, I think, becomes more about the combat than the conversations, and that just
that one definitely has some like balancing issues as far as the combat, because it's very combat heavy. There's really nothing that kind of reins you back in. You occasionally hit like a gate, but then it still encourages you to like go level everything you can.
I've noticed that. So are you playing Golden, Persona 4 Golden?
I am, yeah.
How much trouble, because is this your first time with Persona 4?
So I started playing it on PlayStation 2 and couldn't really get into it. For a long time, like Persona 3 is my favorite, which if you ever tell the internet that, like it just explodes with anger.
I'm not allowed to say that,
Don't do that. So yeah, so far I'm liking it a lot better than the PlayStation 2 version. I think the improvements they made have helped a lot.
Well, I guess my thing with that is, I'm a huge Persona 4 fan, but I can't imagine playing through a game that is like 95% identical a second time, especially a 100-hour game that is 95% identical. Like that's kind of an enormous ask and a big time commitment for someone who is technically an adult.
Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah.
Just so many games these days have trained us to think of them as 2 to 8 to 10-hour experiences.
Yeah.
And as much as people like hem and haw about like, that's not worth $60, that fits my schedule more. I think a lot of my hesitance about JRPGs is like a scheduling and timing issue.
So if you like stories, then are you into Final Fantasy?
I've never really played a Final Fantasy.
I know a lot of people who I would never expect to be into the story of that game, but they're like all about it. It's really strange. I think a lot of it is also like, if you play some of the earlier games when they came out, obviously there's like the nostalgia factor.
A little bit, yeah.
I think just the dialogue in those games, which again I find to be extremely corny, but I feel like the 90s as a decade were extremely corny, so if you played them back then you might not think that.
They fit in a little better with what video games were. Well, there's also that Final Fantasy X remake that a lot of people are excited about right now.
Which actually still captures the corniness and the campiness of it. Yeah, it's pretty much, Final Fantasy X is funny because like replaying it as an adult, I mean when it came out I was like 15 or so. The conversations are kind of crappy. The voice acting is like sort of poor. And
it's like notorious for it.
Notoriously poor, yeah. You have like those awkward scenes, like the laughing scene.
Titus's laugh, yeah.
It's so bad.
Think about that a lot.
But at the same time, going back and playing it, there's a lot of good. I think the story is actually pretty strong on that one. And the characters themselves are interesting. More so than I think you see in a lot of the old games.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, Titus is a sport, like a football player protagonist, basically. He's a sports player protagonist. For a JRPG, that's a little bit innovative. Like, especially for that era, I don't know. I'm gonna it's one of those things where I'm kind of forcing myself to play JRPGs out of a little bit of obligation and a lot of curiosity. And maybe
that's good. You're broadening your horizons.
Trying to. Maybe you should do the same.
Well, okay, so as someone who doesn't typically like JRPGs, what would you suggest as a beginner?
Oh my gosh.
I would definitely go with the handheld one because handheld games I think are just easier because everything is so long now, and to sit down and be like, I'm gonna play this game for 40 hours is it's not really doable as adults. It's hard. In that case, I would say like Fire Emblem Awakening.
Oh, I have that already.
Yeah, see, that's a really good place to start.
I guess I never really, excuse me, I guess I never really considered that a JRPG, but it kind of is.
Yeah, that definition is really blurry. I was interviewing Jeffrey Holland, the guy who wrote Child of Light recently, and he was telling me that he kind of considers it, if not a JRPG, then inspired by them.
Yeah, it's definitely inspired by them. The JRPG umbrella is weird because it is just so big. It's kind of just like Japanese role-playing game, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So it does cover everything from Persona to like Fire Emblem.
Yeah. God, speaking of great writing though, like I don't know how much of Fire Emblem you got to play, but
I played a few hours of it.
That was my game of the year last year, and it was because the characters were so distinct and likable. And there were so many awful puns in it all the time, like nonstop. And it's just, they made a game, they made XCOM, but when the characters die, there's a consequence because you're losing someone and you're losing all the conversations they could have.
Right. But when you kill a character, do you actually let them die or do you restart?
Depends on if I like them or not.
I totally restart, even if I hate them.
By the time I beat that game, I had lost like 7 or 8 people. But they were people who I wasn't like, I wouldn't lose Rickon, ever. I wouldn't lose, what's his name? The candy one? There's like a thief guy who's got a little lollipop in his shirt.
It's been too long since I played.
He's a little cutie.
I can't remember. It has been a while.
Now I want to go back in. Play some of that stupid beach vacation DLC that they put out.
I should go back and play some of that.
I'm gonna make you. I'm gonna make sure you do.
I paid like $10 for it. I may as well.
Get your money's worth.
A lot of money.
It's a lot of money in video
That's
game
like a
dollars.
good sandwich if you think about it.
In this city, it's, yeah, half a good sandwich.
It's like one beer at a fancy bar.
So if you made it all the way through us talking about JRPGs for 10 minutes, then clearly you care about nerd stuff, so you should probably check out Loot Crate. Loot Crate is a subscription box service that delivers cool stuff to your door every month for less than $20 a month. Previous crates have included items from Marvel, Nintendo, Blizzard, and many more. This box here is Attack on Titanfall themed, which is not a typo. There's actual Attack on Titan crossed with Titanfall stuff. So there's like a Titanfall shirt, but then the first issue of the Attack on Titan manga, and then this piece of art that combines them both, and other stuff, survey gear, armbands. This month's Loot Crate theme is dragons, so there's Game of Thrones stuff, Elder Scrolls, classic dungeon crawlers, all sorts of stuff. Check out lootcrate.com/casual for 10% off your first order.